Oui, bonjour. Je m'appelle Rebecca. I was incredibly bad at French when I learned it in school in England, so I'll spare you any more of my attempts at your beautiful language. I was born and raised in the UK, lived there until my mid-20s. I married a guy from America, so was dragged across the pond to America here. Prior to that, I did my undergrad, master's and PhD in English literature at Cambridge University. Spent some wonderful years engaging with many friends who had very good reasons for not being Christians. I then went to theological college for 3 years to learn more about the scriptures myself. And when we moved across to the States, I spent nearly 10 years working with Christian professors at leading secular universities like Harvard and MIT and Yale and Oxford and Cambridge, and hearing from them about how their faith and their area of academic research connected. And after that, I felt like I wanted to share those stories and those insights with other people. So I wrote the book, which in English is called Confronting Christianity, 12 Hard Questions for the World's Largest Religion, as a little bit of a love letter to my non-Christian friends, sharing with them some of the reasons to believe that I'd heard from very intelligent men and women who are at the top of their academic fields, who are serious followers of Jesus. The question of tolerance is actually one that's in many ways been raised by Christians historically, because it's a deeply Christian ethic straight out of Jesus's own mouth, to not only tolerate those with whom we disagree, but actually to actively love them. You know, Jesus goes so far as to say we should love our enemies, even those most hostile to us. So no Christian can operate in the world in a way that is unloving toward people who disagree with them on a whole host of issues, not least on their deepest beliefs about God and the world and humanity. So there's a sense in which, as a follower of Jesus, tolerance is the bare minimum, the least that I should aim for as I relate to people who may identify as anything from atheist to agnostic to Jewish to Muslim to Hindu. But actually, the idea that in order to love and respect somebody, we must agree with everything that they believe and stand for, falls apart when we think about it in most ordinary situations in life. Actually, if I truly respect somebody, I'm going to take their beliefs seriously enough to recognize the ways in which they believe something profoundly different from me. And I would hope that they would have the same respect for me. So when I have conversations with people who identify as Jewish or Muslim or Hindu, and I've had those conversations even just in the last month, it's actually quite disrespectful to say to any of those people, oh, you and I really believe the same thing. We don't. We're making very different claims about who God is, in particular who Jesus is, and what that means for us today. So is it intolerant to say that there is only one way to God? No, I think it's actually profoundly respectful if we take the approach which Jesus took, which is being extremely clear about his identity as the one revealed Son of God who came to, not to actually in the first instance to rule over his people, but actually to die for his people. And at the same time, because of that, because he is the king, not just of the Jewish people to whom he came at first as a fellow Jew, but in his own words, the king of all the world. You know, he's claiming universal kingship. That means that followers of Jesus should live as those who love people from every tribe and tongue and nation, and from every religious and ideological belief system. The meaning of that word is quite contested these days. So homophobia, quite literally means a fear or hatred or dislike of people who identify as gay or lesbian. And as I already mentioned, actually for Christians, it is completely against the teachings of Jesus for us to operate unlovingly towards anybody regardless of the choices that they make or the identity that they hold. So there's one sense in which Christians absolutely should not be homophobic. At the same time, the Bible is actually painfully clear about where sex belongs for Christians, and that is in male-female lifelong marriage. Now, I don't say that lightly. I have been a Christian for as long as I can remember, and I've also been attracted to other women for as long as I can remember. So if I were not a Christian, I think it's very likely I'd be married to a woman today rather than married to a man. So I didn't come to the Bible looking for it to kind of confirm my homophobic prejudices. And sadly, I mean, there are many Christians who do just have homophobic prejudices. I don't deny that. There are many ways and times in which Christians have acted quite unlovingly toward people who identify as gay and lesbian outside the church, and toward people who, like me, experience same-sex attraction within the church. But the same scriptures that draw very clear boundaries around sex for Christians in a way that was actually quite countercultural in the first century, just as it is today, albeit for somewhat different reasons. Those same scriptures call us to a deep and profound love of others. As I've mentioned, as in Greek and Roman culture, sex was about an expression of dominance, actually. It didn't matter whether the person you were sleeping with was male or female. What mattered is whether you were the dominant party or not. And instead, Paul describes in his letter to the Ephesians in chapter 5, he says that husbands should love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. He actually pictures the relationship between a husband and a wife as one of intense sacrifice, which is completely the opposite of how his contemporaries in the Greek and Roman world would have thought about it. And we see both in Jesus' life and in, for example, the ministry of the Apostle Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, aside from the gospel accounts of Jesus' life. We see intense language of love that Paul uses to describe his relationships with fellow believers, not just in general, but actually with specific men with whom he felt a deep affinity and affection. So whereas some people say the Bible is against same-sex relationships, I want to say actually no, the Bible is profoundly for same-sex relationships that are deep and precious and intimate, but they're not sexual, because just as God reveals himself in the Bible as being as father, so that the absolute best human father could give us a tiny little glimpse of God's fatherly love, and just as he reveals it that marriage is based on Jesus's love for his church, so that the absolute best husband would give us a tiny glimpse of Jesus's love for us, so actually the absolute best friend will give us a tiny glimpse of Jesus's love to us, that love than which he said there is no greater.